Hey, welcome to my review for The Batman. So, after so much anticipation, this being one of the most anticipated movies of 2022 and 2021 before this, we finally have got this movie. Now, let me just roll back the clock a few years first and remind you that this movie was originally announced all the way back in 2013, at which point we were supposed to have Ben Affleck both directing and starring in this movie. This was right off the heels of The Dark Knight Rises coming out in 2012, that we were told that we were getting another Batman movie. Now, obviously, as we know, nothing came of that. Rolling through the years of Zack Snyder and the Snyderverse of Ben Affleck playing Batman, we come to 2017 after the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And we've now replaced Ben Affleck as the director and brought on Matt Reeves. Fast forward another 2 years to 2019, and now Ben Affleck's totally gone, sworn off playing Batman, and Robert Pattinson is cast to finally be our Caped Crusader. And this is once we finally get our movie to go somewhere. Now, although this was a long-awaited movie, it really delivered. Matt Reeves has spoken to say that he was inspired for the script for this movie and his direction for it from a number of graphic novels such as Batman Year One, Batman Zero Year, The Long Halloween, all being big inspirations for it, and really wanting to have that style of a detective film and kind of this gothic noir style, really brooding movie. And man, did he deliver on that. And I was here for it. It was an amazing tone and really struck what drew me to Batman. Whenever I was younger, it was Detective Comics that I first picked up for Batman. And it was the Long Halloween story that really made me fall in love with the character. So to see that adapted so well and put to screen in such an amazing way was really, really something breathtaking for me. So a big inspiration for this movie was that Matt Reeves wanted to show us Batman kind of early in his career, where he's still trying to figure out, how he is going to navigate this world and finding his way as a vigilante. So that's exactly where this movie picks us up. We are thrown right into, Robert Pattinson's second year as being the Batman. And he's still very much figuring this thing out. He is not the Batman that we've come to know so often in so many of these stories. Very affected by the death of his parents still, and he is embodying vengeance. So this movie opens with this really great noir style voiceover of, Batman talking about fear and striking fear into the hearts of the criminals of Gotham. And it's one of the best scenes in a Batman movie, bar none. It's such a fantastic way for this movie to open, and it really sets the tone. As we start to get going, we find out that there is a serial killer that is knocking off prominent politicians and figures in the city of Gotham, who reveals himself as being the Riddler. And the entire movie is this detective story of Batman, getting these clues from the Riddler, from each of his, kills and each of the victims, and him, trying to put the pieces together to hunt him down and ultimately stop his grand plans. This is the Gotham City that I've always been dying to see well adapted to a live action film. It feels gritty and dirty. It feels like a city that is rotting, and as it says in the movie, it's eating itself. It's exactly how this feels, and that's how Gotham City has always felt in the comics and in the graphic novels. And it's one of my favorite aspects of Batman, is that the city itself feels like a character and it feels alive, and we really get that in this movie, unlike so many other, adaptations of Batman where Gotham City has felt like New York, or it's felt like Chicago, or, kind of sterile. This Gotham feels lived in. It feels dirty, and it feels like a world where these kinds of characters, would be born out of, where all of this corruption is happening. It really feels alive. And I think that's a really important factor for Batman and for those stories. And it has, a strong effect on the character. And it's amazing to see that, finally come to fruition in this film. Kind of continuing off of that, my favorite aspect of this movie is just the overall aesthetic. I've talked about Gotham feeling like Gotham. But a big factor in that comes from the score from Michael Giacchino, which is just haunting. We got the original score in the trailers of that bass line, and that carries throughout the entire film, and it just is relentless and really adds to the tone and to the feeling of the whole movie. And it pairs phenomenally with the cinematography of Greg Fraser, who's a fantastic cinematographer. And he does so many clever things in this movie and in shooting it, of using, different perspectives and camera angles, having the cameras attached to the cars or to the backs of characters, having, POV perspectives, things like that. It's really, really clever, and it pairs so well with the score to create this great aesthetic. And they've done such a great job of, lighting and costumes, just top to bottom, the actual technical aspects, the production value of this movie is top notch. Just absolutely pinnacle, bar none. This is what every movie should strive for when it comes down to all of the craft aspects of it, of score and cinematography, lighting, costume, makeup, just all around. It marries so well together, and individually, all of these things are great. But this is a case where they come together and the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. When they are all brought together, they just work so well together to make it even more special than they are individually. And another aspect that is just fantastic about this movie is the acting. There was a lot of skepticism about Robert Pattinson when he was initially cast as Batman, and I think that he absolutely knocked it out of the park. I think any kind of concerns about Pattinson, completely gone. Out the window, nobody needs to be worried. He really delivered. But there's a lot of great supporting performances in this as well. You have Colin Farrell as the Penguin, and he just absolutely disappears in that role. Literally unrecognizable, both visually and from his voice. You wouldn't know it is him. You have Zoe Kravitz, who is absolutely fantastic as Catwoman, and she gives the best performance of Catwoman since we had Michelle Pfeiffer back in Batman Returns. And then one of my favorite supporting performances came from John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. He just really nails the mob boss vibe. He feels like this guy that, he's got this charm and kind of disarming nature that you would think a mob boss has, of bringing people close into him. But there's always a level of intimidation, like just snap the fingers, he could turn and just get vicious. And we see that a little bit, and it's just done so well. I'm happy to see him take on a more serious role after, some of the ridiculousness of the Transformers franchise. All of that to be said, though, the standout is undoubtedly Paul Dano as the Riddler. In my opinion, I think that he is, the pseudo star of this movie. Obviously, the star is Batman and Robert Pattinson, but I think that, Paul Dano as the Riddler is the true driving force of this movie and keeps pushing it forward and keeps the tempo and keeps the pace of it throughout. It's really, I think, a character redefining performance that he gives for this Riddler that we've seen be so goofy in the past. And there's a special place in my heart for Batman Forever and the kind of campiness of that. And Jim Carrey is just off the wall. But this really changes the perspective of the character Riddler to make him a bit more intimidating and make him feel like a force to be reckoned with, because he's absolutely chilling and haunting and disturbing, and it's perfect for what he needs to be in this movie. It's just absolutely perfect. Now, for all of that to be said, for all of the gushing and raving and praise that I'm throwing onto this movie, it isn't without its faults, in my opinion. And I think the most glaring one that it needs to be talked about, and it's been talked about even before this movie came out, is the runtime. This is essentially a 3-hour movie, 2 hours, 55 minutes. And I hate to say it, but I don't think it justifies its runtime. Now, for me personally, someone who loved the aesthetic, loved the feel of this Gotham and this movie and this world, I had no problem spending 3 hours in this world. And I look forward to spending even more. I would have taken more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there was a story there to give us 3 hours worth of a movie. There were things that drug on a little bit too long, and I think that could have been cut. Unfortunately, I think the very first thing that sticks out to me as where some trimming could have been done comes with Zoe Kravitz's story as Catwoman. Now, this is by no means an indictment on her performance. I think she's fantastic in the movie. I loved her, and I think she's a great Catwoman, and I look forward to seeing more of her. But we had some C and D plot lines that involved her that it just didn't seem to really play a big role in the overall story arc, and didn't seem critical to be in there, as well as some of the aspects of it that I don't want to get too much into detail for spoiler reasons. It felt a little cliched. It felt like kind of some overtread territory that we didn't need. And like I said, it didn't feel like it served too great of a purpose. So as much as I enjoyed her, I think that we could have cut some of that stuff. There's also a point where it feels like the movie kind of comes to a conclusion, that we come to a head and it should end. But it doesn't. And I love what comes afterwards. I enjoy what we get, but it didn't feel like it was completely in flow. It feels a little bit disjointed. And in those sequences, it kind of gets into the and another thing category where, something happens and then another thing happens and then another thing happens. And then there's another complication put onto that. And it just got to be a little bit too much, where I was sitting there thinking, okay, can we kind of get on with it? And can we get a wrap on this finally? Because it did just seem to be a little bit too much being added on. And again, I enjoyed all of it. I liked all of those aspects and everything that was added on. It just seemed a little bit off pace and a little bit unnecessary to keep adding these different complications to the film. And in terms of other things that I wasn't a huge fan of, there's some characterizations in this movie that didn't really hit for me. There's going to be a lot of talk about this version of Bruce Wayne and how he's not this millionaire playboy philanthropist. And personally, I'm okay with that. Based on the story they were telling and the period in time that we're in, I think it makes sense for this to be a very, brooding and very kind of scorning of the world Bruce Wayne. I think it makes sense for him to be very introspective and not wanting to be a public persona. But I didn't think that there was a lot of character growth for Bruce Wayne. I didn't get the sense that when this movie ended that he had really reconciled too many of his demons so that he could grow to be kind of the Bruce Wayne that we think of when we think of the Batman comics. And kind of going off of that a little bit is kind of the growth of Batman and that character and kind of where he ends up at the end of this movie and the sort of takeaway message. While I think it's great and it's exactly what I wanted it to be, it didn't feel entirely earned to me. It felt like there was a couple of beats that kind of influenced him learning this lesson. And I'm being vague just to not give away details, but I think they could have and needed to hammer home this lesson a little bit harder and make it a little bit more clear that he learned that he needed to change and that he needed to become something different than he is in this movie. And it didn't totally earn itself for me. I love the moment. I love it, and it makes me excited about where we're going. I just think they could have done a better job of nailing it. And the final thing that I don't like is, a sort of thing that I can't talk about because it's setting up the future directions of this movie, but you know it as soon as you see it. And it just doesn't work for me. It's not what I'm looking for. It's not what I'm hoping for. And maybe in the future it will play better and I will feel better about it. But at least right now, in a vacuum, it doesn't hit for me, So some different characterizations. Another characterization that I didn't mention before comes in Thomas Wayne and kind of what they do with that character. Again, for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to get into a lot of details. I don't necessarily think it was bad. It just wasn't to my taste. It wasn't my preference. So that was a little bit of a down note for me. There's some other little things throughout the movie, but I'm getting to be nitpicky at that point in time. And ultimately, the reality is I absolutely love this film. I think it is exactly what Batman can be and should be, and it elevates the genre of superhero films and Batman films to another level, I think. It has its faults, it has some missteps, and it definitely has, places to grow, and I think that can be improved upon for future movies. But overall, I look forward to watching this movie over and over again and loving it for a long time to come. So with all of that to be said, I give The Batman a score of an A-. Absolutely, you need to go out and see this movie, particularly in a theater, so you can experience just the epicness of some of the scenes, like the car chase scene that we see in the trailers. It nails it in a theater, and the experience is like nothing else. So that does it for my review for The Batman. If you like this review, you can like it and subscribe to the channel to see some more films for me. Let me know what you thought of The Batman down in the comments below. Give me your thoughts. Let's try to keep it spoiler free just to not ruin things for anyone else. If you want to keep up with me and the channel, you can, again, subscribe to the channel, and you can follow Everyman Critic on socials of Twitter and Instagram. If you want to see what I'm watching and kind of get the links to videos as they go up, you can follow me on Letterboxd at Air Barber. So that does it for this review. Check out some of my other ones on the channel. But until next time, go out and find your next favorite movie.